So far, we have talked about why European explorers came to the New World and began colonies. Today, we're going to focus on two of the first English colonies in the New World, Jamestown and Plymouth. We'll also look at the general characteristics of the colonies and how those characteristics are used to place the colonies into one of three regions, the New England, Middle, or Southern colonies. There were three major types of colonies. We will begin with the charter colonies, Rhode Island and Connecticut. These colonies were given to people by the king to run as they saw fit. Owners were allowed to establish their own government independent of the king. Colonists were allowed to elect their own governors and members of the legislature to run the colony on a day-to-day basis. However, the king had to approve the governor and had the right to veto acts of the legislature. The king also had the authority to seize control of the colony at any time and convert it to a royal colony. The second type of colony was the proprietary colony. These included Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. These colonies were started by individuals or groups using land given to them by the king, usually to make money. The proprietors were free to rule however they wanted, but they reported directly to the king. They chose the governor and the upper house of the colony's legislature, while the colonists usually chose the members of the lower house of the legislature. The royal colonies of Georgia, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, and South Carolina were ruled directly by Great Britain. The king appointed a governor and the upper house of the legislature, while the colonists were allowed to elect the members of the legislature's lower house. Eventually, all 13 colonies would become royal colonies under the direct control of the king and Parliament. The first successful English colony was founded by the Virginia Company in 1607. They named it Jamestown after the King of England at the time. The owners hired Captain John Smith to help ensure the colony's survival and its profitability. In its early years, starvation was such a constant threat that some colonists actually resorted to cannibalism in order to survive. Other issues faced by the colonists at Jamestown included hostile Native Americans, harsh weather, poor farmland, and diseases that were a result of building the colony on swampland. Eventually, life in Jamestown improved and the colonists began to make a profit due to what King James called that filthy, stinking weed, tobacco. As the colony grew, colonists recognized the need for an effective government and established the Virginia House of Burgesses, the first elected assembly in the New World, to help make laws and govern the colony. In 1620, pilgrims, people who wanted to reform the Anglican Church, traveled to the New World in search of religious freedom. Instead of landing in Virginia like they were supposed to, the ship went off course and landed in present-day Massachusetts. Before leaving the ship to start the colony, the men on board signed the Mayflower Compact. It stated that the colonists would follow all laws established for the good of the colony and is considered the first written constitution in the New World. Plymouth survived in part due to the help of the Patuxet Indian tribe and its leader Squanto. They took pity on the pilgrims, bringing them food and teaching the colonists how to grow crops such as corn so that they would be able to feed themselves. Within a few years, arguments began to break out in the colony over the lack of religious freedom. By the mid-1630s, other colonies such as Rhode Island, founded by Roger Williams, and Connecticut, founded by Thomas Hooker, were founded to continue this idea of religious freedom. The 13 English colonies are divided into three distinct regions based on their geography, weather, economy, and population. We will begin by looking at the New England colonies. The New England colonies consisted of the present-day states of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. If you look closely at your map, you will notice that there are actually two Massachusetts. It's not until later that Maine will be born. If you were to visit the New England colonies, you would notice that the soil is thin, rocky, and heavily forested. The colonists experienced long, harsh winters and short summers. These two factors resulted in the people practicing what is known as subsistence farming. Subsistence farming means that you are able to grow enough food to support you and your family, but not enough to make a profit. As a result of these two factors, the economy of the New England colonies centered on lumber, trade, business, manufacturing, shipbuilding, and some of the best fishing in the world. The settlers of the New England colonies were primarily people from England that had moved to the New World in search of religious freedom. They included Puritans who wanted to reform the Anglican Church and who saw themselves as a city on a hill for the rest of the world to emulate, and separatists who wanted to start their own churches. One of these separatist groups, the Quakers, went on to become the first group of people to fight for the abolition of slavery in this country. The Middle Colonies consisted of New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. If you lived in this part of the 13 colonies, you would see large areas of flat, rich soil and large rivers. These two things, combined with long growing seasons and plenty of rain, resulted in lots of food being grown. Grains such as wheat, barley, and rye were grown on farms throughout the Middle Colonies. In fact, so much food was produced by the Middle Colonies that they came to be known as the breadbasket colonies. Culturally, the Middle Colonies were much more diverse than the New England colonies. Travelers to this part of the 13 colonies would find people from England, Germany, Sweden, and many other parts of Europe. Because of the diversity of the settlers in this area, the culture was much more diverse than in other parts of the colonies. Widespread cultural borrowing took place as people from one culture began to learn the languages and customs of those around them, as well as eating new foods that they had never been exposed to before. Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia were known as the Southern Colonies. People living in the Southern Colonies had access to rich land for farming and broad rivers that could be used for transportation. Excellent weather consisted of long summers and mild winters with plenty of rain. As a result of the favorable geography and weather, the economy in the South was based almost entirely on cash crops such as tobacco, rice, indigo, and cotton. Crops were often grown on large self-contained farms known as plantations. Many plantations were so large that they had their own banks, blacksmiths, and businesses. Because of the large size of these plantations, many owners resorted to slave labor to work the fields. This plantation system resulted in thousands of slaves being forced to work against their will, and very few businesses or industries in the South. The people who lived in the Southern colonies were primarily from England, with a few German and Scotch-Irish mixed in. Settlers in the South did so primarily for economic reasons. However, some people moved for other reasons. For example, large numbers of people moved to Georgia in search of a fresh start. There were many people in Great Britain who owed debts they couldn't pay off. They often had only two choices: go to debtor's prison until the debts were paid off, or move to Georgia and have their debts paid off or forgiven in exchange for becoming a colonist. The large plantations in the South were mainly located along the coastal or tidewater areas of the colonies. As the coastal areas filled up, people were forced to move further west in search of land and began to settle in what came to be known as the back country. This land, between the Appalachian Mountains and the coastal areas, was more heavily forested, and as a result, farms were smaller and hunting became a larger part of day-to-day living. This concludes our discussion of the development of the 13 colonies. Next time we will examine the development of government in colonial America. Now, click on the link below to watch a short video summarizing the major events in the founding of colonial America.